I first noticed how quiet Daniel had become by the way his footsteps barely disturbed the gravel road. There was a hush about him, the kind of silence that does not ask for attention but settles like fog over a valley. He had lost his father not long before, and loss has a way of drawing the air out of a room. Even outside, you could feel it. He moved through town like someone walking through rain that no one else could see, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes on a distance that was not actually there. His father had been a steady man, the kind who returned tools to their exact hook and kept promises stacked the same way. I had watched them from my porch over the years, father and son carrying wood, replacing a fence post, laughing in that easy rhythm families share when tradition is a language. After the funeral, their yard looked too neat. The hammer sat clean. The fence no longer needed anything. Grief hides in surfaces that no longer demand our hands. At the warehouse, they said, Daniel kept to himself and lifted boxes like he was counting something more than weight. I imagined the numbers he was adding in his head. Days since the last conversation. Tasks that now had no reason but still filled the hours. When he came down the slope toward the river one evening, he did not see me on the bench. He stood near the sycamore and watched the current as if trying to decide whether it was moving at all. The river in early spring can look motionless on top, a sheet of pewter. Only when you focus on the drift of a twig do you understand how relentless it remains. I could feel the stillness inside him. It is a peculiar stillness, not rest but suspension, as if everything is held under cold water. The mind pretends to be brave, the body continues. The heart, unsure of its job, takes the smallest steps it can take. I remembered being there once, after my own losses, when days come and go, like rooms with the lights off, and even kindness sounds far away. People will tell you that time heals. It makes you a plain, wide and empty, where even a small gust of wind feels like a storm. He leaned closer to the bank, and the wind carried a damp scent of mud and last year's leaves. The river was not loud, only persistent. That persistence was a kind of whisper, the sort that does not argue. Standing there, Daniel lifted his face as if listening. I did not speak to him that day. I let the quiet do what quiet can do. Some beginnings are not made of words, but of noticing that the world still moves, however softly, and that your breath, though thin, still returns to you. The next time I saw Daniel by the river, he noticed me. He gave a small nod, the kind of greeting people offer when words feel heavy. I patted the bench beside me, and after a pause, he sat down. For a while we simply watched the water. I have learned that silence is often the only bridge a grieving person can cross without fear of falling. After some time, I pointed to a large branch caught between two rocks midstream. The current pressed against it, swirling, tugging, refusing to let it rest. Yet little by little, the branch shifted, each movement almost too small to see, until suddenly it slipped free and continued on. Daniel followed it with his eyes until it disappeared around the bend. I told him that the river never stops flowing. Even when something tries to block its way, it finds a crack, a curve, or a push, and slowly, it carries on. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened, and I knew the image had touched something inside him. We sat there again the following evening, and the evening after that. Each time, I offered him no lectures, only small observations. The water never looks the same twice. A stone in its path does not end its journey, only changes its song. The banks crumble, the weather shifts, yet still it moves forward. Gradually, he began to speak. At first, only fragments. He told me about the emptiness of walking into his father's workshop, how even the smell of old wood and oil made his chest ache. He admitted that he feared he would never be as strong, as steady, as dependable as his father had been. His voice trembled when he said he felt like a river that had dried up. I reminded him that even when rivers appear shallow in summer, the current runs deep below. What looks like weakness on the surface can still hold tremendous strength underneath. He sat very still, and I could see the thought working through him like water searching for a path. Over the weeks, our conversations stretched longer. I asked him to help me carry stones to reinforce part of the riverbank, a task that demanded patience more than muscle. He hesitated, then agreed. The work was simple, yet I watched how his hands began to move with more certainty, how his eyes focused again. As we placed each stone, I told him the river does not fight every obstacle. Sometimes it flows around, sometimes it wears things down slowly. The lesson is not in resisting, but in continuing. Daniel's shoulders lifted a little higher after those afternoons. He still carried grief, but it no longer crushed him flat. The river was teaching him, as it once taught me, that persistence is not loud or sudden, it is quiet, steady, and unstoppable. One evening, as the sun slid low and brushed the water with gold, Daniel arrived at the river carrying a notebook. He sat down without hesitation this time, as though the place had become his own sanctuary. I asked him what he was writing. He said he had started keeping thoughts, lessons, and small memories of his father, not to hold on to pain, but to remember the way his father had lived with steadiness, with purpose, with kindness. His voice no longer trembled when he spoke. There was a quiet strength threading through his words. I watched him trace lines on the page, and I realized the stillness I once saw in him had shifted. It was no longer the stillness of being stuck. It was the calm of someone listening carefully to life again. He told me he wanted to go back to school, to study teaching. He had abandoned that dream years ago after struggling with classes, fearing he wasn't good enough. But now he felt a stirring inside him, a call to guide others the way his father once guided him, and perhaps in the way the river had guided us both. There was a long pause, and then he asked me if I thought he was capable. I reminded him of the branch we had watched together months earlier, trapped in rocks but slowly breaking free. I told him the river does not measure its success by how quickly it moves, but by the fact that it never ceases to move at all. Daniel closed his notebook and smiled, not the full smile of someone who has finished grieving, but the first true smile of someone who has chosen to move forward. In the weeks that followed, I saw changes in him. He walked straighter. He spoke more freely to neighbors. He returned to his father's workshop, not to mourn, but to build small things: a chair, a shelf, nothing grand, but acts of creation instead of absence. Each piece was a conversation with memory, and each one seemed to return a part of himself he thought he had lost. On our last evening together before he left to enroll in classes, we sat once more by the river. The current was stronger after a week of rain, rushing, unyielding, alive. Daniel looked at it with a quiet reverence. He told me he no longer felt like a dried-up stream. He felt like the river itself, carrying both sorrow and hope, both memory and possibility, forward into a new course. As he rose to leave, he thanked me, but I told him it was never MIT, was always the river, and perhaps it was always within him, waiting for the moment he dared to flow again. There are moments in life when we feel like everything has stopped, when grief or hardship makes us believe that our journey is over. But the truth is, much like the river, we are never truly still. Even in our quietest hours, something inside us keeps moving, searching for a way forward. Daniel's story reminds us that obstacles do not end the flow, they shape it. If you are facing your own rocks and bends, trust that you, too, can keep moving. If this story touched you, share it, leave your thoughts below, and join us on Brighter Tomorrow.